Thanks, Professor Zhao, and so happy to be at Berkeley. And like Ed Friedman, I'm old-fashioned. We don't use PowerPoint because our faces are more handsome than the screen, especially Ed. Also, I agree with Ed's view about China ambition in East Asia, in the South China Sea, which is the focus of my own paper, that along the rise of the Chinese power, China is going to build a hegemonic order, or China-centered regional order, or regional disorder, as this topic and this conference topic suggests. Why I can make that argument? Because of China's evolving behavior in the South China Sea. Disputes have clearly demonstrated this intention, even with international arbitration, which is in favor of the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries. China could ignore that simply as just a piece of wasted paper, and does not help. That has not helped build a so-called rule-based rule-based regional order. Let me elaborate a little bit of my argument and the case. My paper is divided into several aspects. So one is looking at China's evolving positions on the South China Sea dispute. Second, I look at how China responses to the international arbitration has what the implications of that, and finally I will draw some conclusions. First, let's look at China's evolving positions on the South China Sea disputes. What my view here is that China has evolved from a strategic ambiguity to a strategic clarity. How this has developed. The map, that's what people have talked about by the Republic of China in 1947, has become the base for the PRC's claims of the South China Sea as a China's territory. But for many years after the founding of the PRC, China's claims were very ambivalent, were never clear. And also for quite a while, China was also very, very low-key on the claims. The facts that the so-called 11 dash lines, China gave away 2 dash to the Vietnam in the 1950s, and also they are interrupted dash lines instead of solid lines, were very good indication that for quite a while, China was not very clear on the implication of those lines, and were also very flexible, to a certain extent, very flexible on some kind of adjustments of those lines. In fact, until up to even, I would say, 8 or 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, I would say, China never made very clear that these claims were the claims of sovereignty over those within those 9 dash lines, or just kind of rocks, all the rights of the water for the resources. Never clear. Even I remember Wang Yi, the foreign minister, when he came to the UN meeting, I think 5 years ago in Washington, he gave a presentation at I think Brookings Institution, at the end of his presentation, William Cohen raised his hand asking if those dash lines has been changed to the solid line. He said, I saw some maps. Wang Yi said, where you can find those maps? I've never seen a map putting those dash lines into solid lines. So in that context, even by then, I don't think China made clear what kind of claims sovereignty versus just some kind of ambivalent claims over the resources or the rights. And 2009, the UN required China to submit a map. Even on that map, I don't see China had any clear indication. I think that was deliberate from Chinese side because in that case, for quite a while, China tried to deny this resolution. So if China does not make the claims clear, the other claimants will not be able to make clear counter arguments or claims to force China to show down with those countries. So that fit into China's strategy. And in the meantime, when we talk deny strategy, does not mean China will not want to consolidate its position. In fact, the deny strategy is strategy to for the long-term future. And that's what I think at argument. China has the ambition to make sure this area is China's territory. So consolidate its position to build its capacities for the eventual long-term claims. In the meantime, China tried to find so-called legal foundation, that is historical foundation. China tried to claim even 2,000, 3,000 years ago, China's salespeople were already on those islands and named those islands. The Vietnam and other countries, the Philippines, even did not know those islands. But these historical arguments were not very solid because even Malays were those kind of, at those 2,000 years ago, South China Sea were their seas. So many studies about those historical fishing activities really countered China's historical arguments. But for quite a while, China was not very straightforward on those arguments. This position changed since Xi Jinping came to office. China has gradually made clarity on the sovereignty claims, especially when Xi Jinping, and even before that, they already included the South China Sea as the so-called category of core national interests. What is core national interest, which could be defined as the bottom line of a nation's survival. If that's bottom line, you cannot negotiate, you cannot compromise. So when that has been included into the core national interest issues, China's position has gradually changed. Try to clarify this position. Xi Jinping has made that very clear at the 2013, the first periphery Central Periphery Work Conference. That's the first time ever in the PRC history. The Central Party held a very high-level conference to discuss the periphery policy issues. At that conference, Xi Jinping draw red lines. That's Xi Jinping's way of thinking, the bottom line thinking, 底线思维, the bottom line thinking, and draw red lines. In the past, China always say, what we don't want. But now China has changed, what do we want? What we want you to do. Yes, we want to be peaceful rise. But if we want peaceful development, the condition is that you also should be peaceful. You have to respect my interests. So my peaceful development is no longer unconditional. Have been conditioned that the other side has to act the same way. So that's so-called red line or bottom line thinking. So Xi Jinping has, even at the 19th Party's Congress report, made very clear that these territories are left by our ancestors and ancient time, 老祖宗留下来的. So that's very clear that this is our sovereign territory. So this change has very clear. From 2013 also, China has accelerated building those artificial islands, which is a very dramatic. I talked to some Chinese scholars, technology. Someone talked earlier about technology. They are really good using those technology to mash up those kind of in the ocean into the island overnight, 6 square kilometer big, really overnight. Technology. That started Hu Jintao time. There were a lot of people in the China think tank. People tried to propose those kind of land reclamation, but Hu Jintao held them. Xi Jinping said, "Let's go forward." Even those kind of struck line the wrong ways of for the airplanes. The military requested. Xi Jinping said, "Let's build 3." They built 3, very long, 2,000 meters long. So that's a very big change. Because time constraint, let me move on to the second aspect. In that case, the small countries, little countries in the South China Asia are concerned. Because in that case, these countries would have no 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zones. All they left were 12 nautical miles of the territorial water. So they tried to find ways. But for small states, they cannot build military capacities to counter China, nor they can build military alliances countering China. All they could do was to use multilateral approaches or appealing to international law. That's what the Philippines did 2013 to the international arbitration. Eventually, the Philippines win, but win for nothing. The win does not worth anything because it's not implemented. China launched a huge diplomatic and propaganda campaign to counter this international arbitration, and China has been very successful. In terms of I wrote an article just talking about how China has launched a geopolitical battle against the international law, and the geopolitics win over the international law. I don't want to get into that detail. Here, the key point is that the international law cannot be implemented, does not have the mechanism to implement unless the international community put pressures on the country to comply. But the international community shows such a huge incompetence or unwillingness to implement the law. I have some numbers. When before the ruling, July 12th, 2016, were announced, there were about 70 countries said those rulings should be binding. 1 month after, only have about 7 countries said those verdicts are binding. So U.S. was the country said you should follow that. After the ruling, the Suisheng Rice, at that time National Security Advisor, was in Beijing. She even did not mention that. And John Kerry met with Wang Yi at the ASEAN ministerial meeting. He said, let's turn this page away. And the European Union did not really, at the 3 days meeting, came out nothing. ASEAN regional forum or the ASEAN ministerial meeting came out no any statement because consensus building, even only one country disagreed. They could not have any resolutions. So China, in that case, win. But win at what kind of price? Here we'll see. That's this topic of the conference, regional disorder. Really, the rule-based international order in that case would be very difficult to build. But for China, let me use make a final point. China has also fed a very big dilemma here. Chinese always talk about 2 issues here. One is Weiquan, the other is Weiwen. To maintain regional stability and peace versus to defending its so-called rights. The defending the rights has been now prevailing over the regional maintaining the regional peace. And that will be also at the price of China's long-term interest, because I don't think, at least for foreseeable future, China is in a position to build a hegemonic regional power, because the U.S. is still there, although Trump is not interested at all. But I don't think the U.S. could relinquish its responsibility, and Japan and some other regional countries, and also the Pacific, the maritime resources and the sea lines are so critical. So I don't think China can do it. So that's a dilemma for China. So I stop here. Thank you.